Hopping in our garage yesterday. Oh,
Good evening, everyone. I'm here with Wayne and Phyllis and Kent Anderson. Coffee with Mildred. It's called Coffee with Mildred because of I've heard many stories of Wayne's mother and people having coffee and telling stories around the kitchen table by the wood cook stove over at her house, and I wanted to bring that history and connection to people who didn't have the chance to go and do that. And for every time that we always said, I wish we would have recorded our conversations with so and so who's no longer with us, I'm doing that and want to share it with everyone. So welcome to Coffee with Mildred. Again, tonight it's me and my son Kai. They'll be taking your questions.
hello.
So feel free to use the chat function, ask a question, and we will present it to our speakers and see if they have any more information that can help us with that. So without further ado, we are starting. Oh, we've already done a couple of conversations with Wayne and family. So we are starting now with 8th grade, which at that point, let me turn it around here. We'll get everyone lined up. Okay, you're gonna have to squeeze in close to Wayne again. Does that look all right?
Yep.
Okay. So 8th grade, you went from the school at the one where Harborview Apartments is now, right?
No, at 8th grade, I was still on Maple Hill.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah, 8th grade, I was on Maple Hill School. That's where Steve Carlson lives now.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there was 2 classrooms, 2 teachers, 1st through 4th and 5th through 8th. And when I first went there, there was 3 teachers. There was 1st through 4th, and then 5th and 6th, and then 7th and 8th, 3 rooms. But when I went there, there was 2. And so.
And who were the teachers?
Well, I'm not going to enumerate all the teachers, but
if there's only 2, that's not hard to
remember. When I was in 8th grade, I think it was Ruth Edstrom and Grace Boyson from that later taught up at Clearwater, but she taught at the Maple Hill School for a year or 2, and so that's where I finished the 8th grade, and then of course, you know, the one room schools are the small rural schools. There was definite advantages to them because, you know, if you were in the younger classes, you got a prep of what was coming. By the time you got to the class you're in, you kind of already knew that, you know. The unfortunate part was if you're in the 8th grade, then you were taught by somebody who had to teach 4 other classes, so you didn't get the full education that like the town kids got, where they had, you know, one teacher for at least one teacher for one class, or sometimes maybe one teacher for math and somebody else for English. So it was good and bad, mm-hmm. But in my case, I enjoyed it there, and of course, when you go to we had to go to 9th grade, then at the school where the apartment is now, then you were kind of like you were the country kid into the big city, you know, and of course, all the kids from the big city let you know it, that you were the country kid, and so on. And there was probably no doubt, because you know, I mean, when I got to 9th grade and got into algebra and such, I'd hardly ever heard of it. We didn't really get that. I mean, the teacher. I don't blame the teachers because they didn't have time. They'd go through what they could, and then well, you'll get that next year, so it'll be all right. Well, that's fine. But when you get there and everybody else knows that, and you don't know what they're even talking about, what does A equal? I haven't heard of A equal anything. I knew what 9 and 10 would equal, but I didn't know what A would equal.
Right. When did we start doing math with letters?
Right. So it was difficult. And then, of course, when you come from a country school or a country bumpkin, you don't like to ask too many questions because it makes you look dumb. And of course, that's a no-no for kids. So you got to pretend that you know what's going on, even if you don't. So I struggled some, and about time I'd start to get almost figure out what they were talking about. They'd move to something else, and then I'd be lost again, and so on. So, but I got through it.
Yeah.
So.
So you did 9th through 12th then.
Yeah.
At
the old school
in town
where the apartment is now. Yeah.
Harborview.
Yeah, Harborview apartment, and then the Maple Hill School still operated as a independent district. We were District 3 at that time, but I think about 1951 or sometime like that, when the schools consolidated, then they closed the outlying schools in Maple Hill and the whole those Tofty too, I guess. No, maybe not Tofty yet, but yeah, probably Tofty too. I don't remember. But then they started transporting everybody to Grand Marais, and but that was after my time in school. But
did they have like school sports or anything at that time?
The only thing they had when I was going to school was they had a varsity basketball. No football, no baseball, no skiing, just basketball. And the reason was, well, the uniforms are too expensive and blah, blah, blah. We can't afford that. So, and it's probably true, but and the transportation, but they did have a varsity basketball team. I never played on it because, again, growing up in a small country school, we didn't get to do sports. So, the town kids were pretty good at it. I wasn't any good at it, it's just like it's much the same as at that time. The girls would play basketball or something just as an intramural thing, not as a varsity. And we all felt, yeah, well, girls can't play basketball. That's obvious. Look at them, they're running. Well, look at them nowadays, but they get a chance to practice when they're young and get as good as the boys or better. So it's a different world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you have a job when you were in high school too?
Well, in the summers I had some work. I worked at the Edstrom Mill. I guess from the time I was, maybe even before I went to high school, in the lumber, I'd work as a lumber checker. They'd load lumber out of a pile onto a truck, and then the scaler would call the grade and the length and the width and all, and you had to hurry up and put it in a book so that the piece count of the load by the time they got it done. And I used to do that, and that wasn't a hard job, except that the scaler would call out numbers fast, and you had to find them and get it in the right column. But I did that, and then of course later years, then I worked in the planing mill in the summertime, haul lumber down to the kiln. They had a kiln down by the planing mill. We used to and they haul it down from in those days they didn't pile lumber in what we call lifts now, a package where you can pick it up with a forklift. It didn't have any forklifts. So they piled it when they saw the sawmill then was up in the woods. They'd haul the lumber down on a truck and they'd put it in a big high pile, maybe 16 feet wide and 12, 14 feet high. And then the earth would dry. Then we'd go up with a truck and load it out of those piles. And if it was dry enough to plane, we'd haul it right to the planer. But if it wasn't, then we'd haul it to the kiln and load a kiln car and have it dried and then plane it. So I did that.
How old were you when you cleared the stretch of the Gunfoot?
Oh, well, yeah, when that would have been in 45. So I would be 14. And I cut the right of way for when they were putting the power, the electric power was coming through. It wasn't REA at that time, it was a private Lucent Light and Power. Porter, a gentleman named Porter started it. But he started from scratch with no right of way, nothing. And they had to cut right away from Lucent to everywhere it went. And at that time, I guess it came to Maple Hill. I don't know if it went, I don't know, it might have gone to Hoagland then yet, but it didn't go to Portage for a while after that, and it didn't go up the trail. But anyhow, I cut right away from over where Kent lives now, north, and it wasn't quite a quarter of a mile, but just straight through the woods, all trees and brush and trees, and my dad laid it out. They didn't even have right away or surveyed or anything. They just said, "Well, this is where we kind of want to go. So you cut a line from here up to the dump track road, and that's where we put the line." So we did. My dad ran a compass line, and we put a picket line, and then you had to cut 15 feet on each side of the picket so that you had a 30-foot right of way. And I cut that between the home place there and the river, which was, it wasn't quite a quarter of a mile, but almost. And I did that alone when I was 14.
With a chainsaw?
With a handsaw.
With a handsaw.
A handsaw and an axe. My dad did help me cut the big trees. There was some big popple in there, and he helped me. We cut those with a 2-man saw. Otherwise, I cut it all by hand.
My.
The good old days.
That's a good old day. Yeah.
That's a workout. How long did it take you?
I don't know. I suppose. I know I cut on the 4th of July, and I suppose it might have taken 3 weeks. I don't know, something like that. Yeah.
And what did you do with the trees and the wood?
Well, we made firewood out of it. Yeah. And we didn't get any money for it. We probably would have, but in order to get from there up to the house where we lived, they had to run 2 or 3 poles, and that was an extra charge. They'd hook you up for if the line ran right by your house, they'd hook you up for $50. But if they had to put in any extra poles or that, it was $100 a pole. Well, $100 in those days is a lot of money. So they didn't charge anything for running the extra poles, and we didn't charge anything for cutting the right away. So essentially, I didn't get paid, but in a way we did get paid. The family got paid because we got power.
Yeah.
You can't imagine when you don't have power, have never had power, And then all at once you turn the switch and the light, we had the house wired and that prior to the thing because the power is coming, but maybe,
Right. Someday.
And then all of a sudden you turn the switch and the light comes on. You can't believe, you can't believe how it's really something when you're used to kerosene or gasoline lamps or such. And I just think of the old story about the old farmer when the power line came through, and boy, he said, "This is wonderful." He said, "It used to be I'd have to get up in the night at 4 o'clock or whatever it was, fumble for matches, and light the lantern, and then go out and take care of the cattle and this and that." He says, "Now all I gotta do is pull the chain and I can find the matches and light the lantern and get ready." So that's kind of where we were. Boy, this is wonderful. I mean, and that's what they call it. We got lights. I mean, the lights are coming. It wasn't power or electricity. It was lights. We're gonna have lights. It's really something.
Yeah.
When you've never had it.
Yeah.
And of course, it wasn't long then before all the stuff that you can do with electricity comes along too. First you get a toaster, and then you get an electric iron, and then you get, and then after a while you get a water pump, and you get all the things. A refrigerator, we've all had ice prior to that, and you didn't have to carry ice anymore. You turn on the switch and you can go get the ice. No, I mean,
ice house.
Yeah.
You had an electric refrigerator, and really something. So it's a different world when you live in a world with there's no power and no hope of getting any. I mean, you had some people had generating plants, but not very many.
Uh-huh.
And then all at once you got power, and it was wonderful. Still is. Still wonderful. I'm still impressed.
So when did phones come in?
Phones came in prior, before my time, but the first one that I heard of is that a guy by the name of Bell, and not Alexander, but he ran a phone line up the shore or something, and from Grand Marais up the hill, and people were so anxious to get a phone that when he got up to the Four Corners, and the people that lived up the hill by the cemetery there, the Gilbertson, and of course they were anxious to get a phone, so he hooked it on the barbed wire fence, and they got a phone through the fence until they got the wire run. But the phone at my home, I don't know when it was put in, but it was probably put in the late 20s or something like that.
So you had a phone before you had electricity.
But my dad had to build the line. My dad cut the right of way and cut the poles and put it in, and then they came and ran the wire, and so we had a phone. So in my time, we always had a phone. It was the old kind of phone where you go to the wall and but we had a phone.
Can you tell about the party line and the one young woman that?
Oh, yeah, it was party lines, of course, in those days, and you could hear everybody's. There was maybe, I don't know how many people on a party, but maybe 6 or 8 or something. And you could hear the rings, and of course it was entertainment for the neighbors to listen in and see what somebody was talking about. So you'd hear the ring, and I didn't listen, but because I wasn't interested. But some people were. And then the other thing is, so if you were on the phone and somebody wanted to use the phone, they'd click the thing up and down and make a lot of racket so you'd get off the phone. In other words, they'd be telling you, "Hey, I want to make a phone call, get off the phone." They'd click it, And so anyhow, my sister was on the phone, and there was a neighbor girl, young girl, and she lived with her grandmother and she was kind of home alone all day and nothing to do. So of course, that's what her entertainment was, listening on the phone. And my sister was talking to somebody, and this girl was clicking, clicking, clicking. And my sister told her, she kind of pretty sure who it was, and she said her name, this girl, if you don't get off the phone, I'm going to call the phone company and report you. And so she hung up. A minute later, the phone rang, and it wasn't me that was clicking on the phone.
Goodness. Well, and your sister is a talker.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I've.
Yeah, she was. She's getting very old now, and so she's she's had a stroke, and she's still. You can talk to her, but she kind of got over. It used to be that you didn't want to call her unless you had an hour or two outlined ahead of time, because you wouldn't get off the phone. There's no way, and you didn't dare say much, because if you said anything, you'd remind her of something to talk more about. So you kind of just listened mostly. But yeah, she loved to do that.
She did the talking.
She did the talking, yeah. And she used to write letters also, and right every day she'd write letters, long letters to people, to all her friends, everyone. Yeah.
She also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your parents' home was a 2-bedroom home.
Yeah.
And so your parents had one room, and you and your brother Chuck had another room.
Yeah.
Now, was Alice in the middle? Was she a middle child? Phyllis?
Phyllis, she was older.
She's the oldest.
She's the oldest.
Yeah.
And then Chuck, and then Wayne.
So at some point, she paid for an addition to go into the house.
She did. And those were Depression times and very, austere times. And we had a davenport in the living room that would open up into a bed. So that was at nighttime that became a bedroom also. But because it was short of sleeping rooms, when she first got a job teaching, she got some money for materials and put on an addition on the house. Yeah, she did that.
So she could have her own room.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So was she teaching up here, or did
She was teaching at Tofty at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. She started, I think, maybe 2 years after she graduated. At that time, you could go to school for 2 years and get a teaching certificate. It wasn't a degree, but it was so you could teach, certain elementary or whatever. And a lot of people did that. A lot of teachers did that. They just had a teaching certificate. And then, of course, later on, she completed her 4 years and got a degree. But she taught 2 harbors in Biwabik and Golden Valley and lots of different places. And then she went out to Washington State and taught there for quite a few years. She was a very good teacher. She taught at the school in Washington, in Seattle. That was a school for troubled kids, and they couldn't. She went there as a substitute because they couldn't keep a teacher there for more than 2 weeks. They'd had it, they'd leave. So she went there as a sub, and she somehow was able to teach those kids and got their confidence, and she didn't have much trouble. And of course they were very reluctant to let her go. So she taught there for a few years, and
That just seems like it's a made-for-TV movie.
Well,
Of what I know of
I'll-
your sister
I'll-
Phyllis and
I'll just
like
tell you,
working with troubled kids.
she was also an aspiring writer, and she wrote stuff that she got published. But one story she wrote that was in the published in one of the teachers' magazines, and she was teaching this class, and she had to leave the room. She was called to the principal's office for some reason. You were very reluctant to leave the class because you didn't know what was going to happen when you were gone. But anyhow, she went and she came back, and some bard had written on the blackboard F-U-C-H, and some of the kids, she came, oh, this is neat. Now Donnie done it. Some of the kids said, Donnie done it. And no, it wasn't Donnie that done it. He knows how to spell it. So, but she got along well with it, in a very difficult school.
Yeah.
But then later on, she as she got older, then she ran a preschool out of her house for the remaining years before she retired.
I remember the preschool, it was in a made-over garage, and we went out to visit her one time, and Kent was about 2 years old, and we brought him out, and she had the kids blow painting, I suppose, whatever you call it, and they would put, watercolor paint on a paper and then take a straw and blow designs. And I have a picture of Kent blowing, with this little straw. It just reminds me of how cute it was and fun. She had lots of fun ideas for the kids.
She's very good. She's a very good teacher. Yeah. What a natural, there are such.
Yeah. And what about your brother? where did he fall in the?
My sister was the oldest, he was next, and I was the last. I was the baby in the family. He was 5 years older than I am. She was 6 years older than I am. And or a little bit more.
About 7.
Yeah, almost 7. And anyhow, he started working young, and but I think in the summer when he first started, he might have worked, part-time for the telephone company. And then when he got out of school, he worked here locally for the telephone company as a maintenance and installer. And then he went in the Navy for, I don't remember how long, 2-3 years. And then when he got out, then he went back with the telephone company because they honored your service time as time in service for the company. So it was a good deal for him. And then he worked for them until his retirement.
He became a foreman for him, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a foreman. He had a construction crew, and different places in the state. But they'd also, like nowadays, I think of when you hear these power crews and different people are going to Louisiana and that for when they have the hurricanes, and he had to do that. He went down to Lake Charles where the latest hurricanes hit. Mm-hmm. One winter he had to go there. They went down, his crew went down and fixed telephone communication lines. Yeah.
So when you graduated high school, then you went till 12th grade. Did they have big graduation parties like they do now?
I don't think so. I don't think they did. But graduation was sort of a big deal, they had the ceremony and all, but I don't recall that there was parties. Certainly not legitimate ones. Somebody might have had something. I don't recall any.
Yeah, what were parties like when you were in high school?
They were pretty tame.
Yeah,
they were pretty tame. Pretty, it was. There's always a few roughnecks, and there's lots of good kids. They were pretty tame. Most kids are good kids. Still are.
Yeah.
Some of my classmates. I may be the last of the Mohicans on the boys. There might be one left. I'm not sure from Lutzen, but there's several girls still
In
alive
his graduating class.
in my
Yeah.
graduating class. Yeah, and they were all good kids, and they're still good people.
Mhm.
So,
So what did you do after high school then?
well, I did a variety of things, but I know one summer I drove a gas truck for the local Standard Oil dealer, and I think that was maybe in 49, and I hauled gas from my ran right to the border. There was four. I had 4 stations to service. One in Hoagland, Charlie Mills, and then run at Reservation River. One at Minnow Center, and then riding to the border. And I did that for the summer. And then in the winter, I'd either work at the Hedstrom mill or logging, usually for them in the woods. And then sometimes I worked for Bud Bent. It was another sawmiller and logger. And I worked, I think in 51, I worked for him that summer and fall into the winter. And then,
Is that when you were up at Seagull?
yeah, we were at Seagull. He had a sawmill there and logged an island in Seagull. It was Blankenberg's Island. It was a 77-acre island or something. A lot of pine. And we rafted the pine down the lake, and then had the sawmill right where the outfitter is now,
Oh, okay.
in the bay there.
Mhm.
And so we sawed until freeze up, and we finished, and then moved the mill out. But so, and then I was supposed to drive again, haul gas the next summer for Velvik, the standard dealer. But I said, well, yeah, I'll drive for you if I don't have to go in the service. But I did. I got drafted. So, and that was the end of that. And I went in service for 2 years.
And what did you do in the service?
I was a helicopter mechanic. After my basic training, they give you aptitude tests, and I apparently got a fairly high mark in the mechanical aptitude test. So I was supposed to go to truck mechanic school. There was a bunch of guys. I don't remember how many, maybe 15 or something, that were supposed to go to truck mechanic school. But then, before the orders were cut, I think that there was 8 of us that were pulled from that, and we had to go to helicopter mechanic school. And that was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I went there and took that training. And then normally, I guess this was Korean War era, so normally you'd get shipped overseas and then to Korea. But because the instructors, there was about a 2-year enlistment rotation, and by the time I finished mechanic school, a lot of the instructors that taught me were being phased out or discharged. So then I got to be, I worked on the line of the mechanical fixing helicopters for the school for maybe 6 or 7 months or something like that. But then we got moved to instructors, so then we started teaching mechanics, and that's what I did until because it took so many mechanics to keep this school going. They weren't training enough people fast enough to take care of the needs for the overseas shipment and such. So they hired a civilian contractor then to take over the maintenance. So then we had to supervise the civilian contractor people until they got proficient. And so then by that time, it was time for me to get discharged. So.
And you headed back north.
Then I headed north. No.
It was pretty hot down
It was
there.
hot down there. No, it's in the days before air conditioning, and it was hot. And all I could think about is the entire time I was there was, boy, I wish I was near Lake Superior. Just think of that cold, cool Lake Superior, just hotter than blazes down there, and no air. No air. Well, there was air conditioning in the theaters and a few places, but nothing that, no place where I stayed. There was barracks and that were completely just hot.
I don't know if much has changed. Brandy just got back and she never once had air conditioning down in Texas when she was training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to give you an idea of how hot it was in the summertime, we never slept on a mattress. We always slept on a spring, on the spring, because it was cooler.
Oh my gosh.
Really?
Yeah. You had to fold it because it was dusty down there too, so you had to fold your bedding every day. You roll up the mattress and roll up all your bedding and fold it out. And we just lift the whole thing off the bed, put it aside, take your pillow and lay it right on the spring and sleep on the spring.
How did that feel?
It felt better than the hot mattress.
I guess.
It was army beds, they had, it was like wires with springs on the end,
Yeah.
monk is, yeah. It was that kind of a spring. It wasn't like coil springs you slept on. It was, it was like a steel mesh almost with springs on the end.
I was going to say about 20 years ago now, at least, we went back to Fort Sill.
Yeah.
And he went, and I mean, it was fun to see him at Fort Sill because he knew everything, he knew all the places, and we went into a big hangar and he was looking for somebody to talk to, and I think it was fun for you.
It was fun, and it had changed a lot. There wasn't a air section there anymore. With this place where I lived, it was right on what they call Post Field. It was an airstrip, airport, airstrip there, and all these planes, and the building we stayed in was, we call it the hotel. It was a big 2 or 3 story building with this, stucco and tile roof and all. It was a nice permanent type facility, but there wasn't any air section there anymore. There was no aircraft and nobody to talk to. There was one helicopter sitting out on the lawn as a display or an artifact or something. But in the hangar itself, if I went in the hangar, I don't know what they were doing in there, but there were no people, and I walked around. I couldn't find anybody to talk to. So it was very odd,
Yeah.
But and then of course down there we also went to the old post, they called it, which is that Fort Sill has been there for a long time, and on the old section there's old buildings, limestone buildings with big steel rods to hold the roof down, because I suppose they must have had tornadoes in the old days too, and they had big anchors and things that held the roofs on so they wouldn't blow off. but in one of those buildings, there's Geronimo's cell, the one where they kept Geronimo for a while after when he was captured when it was still Indian territory. And so I'd seen it before, but we stopped there and looked at that and other things. It's very nice post. It's old with big shade trees and such. It's very nice. That part of the post. Yeah.
So was that sort of, you're very mechanically inclined.
Sure. So that's why I've made a living all these years.
Right. So was the military, was that the first sort of training and interaction and expanding that, or had you already known that you were?
Actually, I had some experience. I had worked for like I said, I'd worked for Mr. Bud Bent, and I did a lot of his mechanical work on cats and power unit engines and stuff, overhauled them and stuff. So I sort of just had a aptitude for that. And
How did you learn all that? I mean, did you have a mentor that taught you? Because
well,
I mean, there
not
wasn't
at that time.
Google
Not at that time. I started out when I was, I don't know, 13 or 14, monkeying with old engines and learned by doing. And a neighbor up here gave me a Model T engine that he tried to smash it and he couldn't. So he threw it in a hole and I dug it out. He gave it to me and I dug it out, and it wasn't too long I had it running. And eventually I made a soldering out of it. Still have the engine, by the way. But I got that, and then I had, like I said, I'd done these diesels and stuff for Bud Bent. And then one spring, before I went in the service, I worked for Emil Hall, who had a garage in town, because his son Neil, who was his regular full-time mechanic, he wanted to go beaver trapping, and so I filled in for him. And so I did work with Emil, and he of course was very good. He was a very good mechanic and genius, mechanical genius. So I had some experience. So I suppose that's how I managed to get the mechanical aptitude points that I needed in the service to get into the helicopter business. And then when I got out of the service, then I went for I worked for Carl Mort, who was a trucker and a contractor here for 5 years, and I did a lot of mechanical work for him, overhauled cranes and shovels and cats and such, and drove trucks. And I didn't do the truck work, but I did other machinery work. And he was a pretty good mechanic, so I learned stuff. Everywhere you go, you learn. Everybody you meet, you learn from them, no matter what. So I did that, and then after I worked there, then I worked I went back to Headstrom's full time. Then I'd worked there off and on summer times and different winter times and partial, not full time. And then I went back there full time, and then I worked with a guy who was a mechanical genius. His name was Hilding Berkland, and he was not only a good mechanic, but he was a very good machinist and a wonderful welder, and just all around good mechanical guy. And he was a good guy, a nice guy, but he wasn't a good teacher as such, because he didn't like you
Looking over his shoulder.
looking over his shoulder. He didn't like you looking over his shoulder. I mean, if the window was on the left side and you were standing on the right side, he'd push you and say, "You're in my light," you know. And so you had to sneak in order to watch him. But I managed to do that pretty well, and I learned a lot of stuff from him. And so I learned to run the lathe, do stuff in the lathe and make stuff. And I would work with him, and he'd always say, "Well, got to do this, but there's no way to hold it or no way to do this or something." And I'd say, "Well," I'd always say, "Well, I'm not a machinist, but could we do this or could we do it that way?" And finally he'd say, "Yeah, maybe we can." And so he would do that. And so anyhow, but then he finally retired. So then I was working there, and I had made some kind of a fixture to hold saws, circular saws, and it wasn't a complicated thing, but it had a hole in it that had to go on a shaft, and it had a face on it that the saw fit in, and then it had another collar and a thread, and I made that and was using it. And he had retired then, but he came in the shop one day and looked at that. And he picked the thing up and he took me, looked at it, and he unscrewed the thread and stuff, and put it back together and put it back. And he said, "Don't ever tell me that you're not a machinist." I thought, well, that's a pretty nice compliment coming from a guy that was a superb machinist. But he thought he must have thought I did all right. So, and of course, after that, I did the machinist work for years and years and years.
At Headstrom's.
Yes. Yeah.
But I have to brag about some work that he has done, because in Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Grand Marais, all the wrought iron candelabras, and then the candelabras on each pew for weddings, he was commissioned to do all those, and he made his own design and did all of the building of them. And
I never knew that.
Yeah.
They're gorgeous.
And he also was commissioned to do it in a church in Superior, Wisconsin, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there, Bob and Dode Stoskopf commissioned him
Okay.
to do that.
Yeah, I did that, and but I don't claim to be a artist.
I think that's art.
Well, it sort of,
Yeah.
it sort of
You
is, but
designed it
but
yourself.
yeah. But anyhow, let's be that as it may.
Yeah.
But I did when I was young. And when I was working there, I didn't have a snowmobile, and I wanted one so bad that I built one, and I still have it. But it was entirely built from scratch. I didn't have anything to make it out of other than just iron. And I started out with I had an old motorcycle transmission, and that's all I had. And then I acquired an old chainsaw engine, a distant two-cylinder distant chainsaw engine, and I coupled those two together, and then I went from there and made the frame and the track and the drive and it had 2 speed ranges because I didn't have enough gears in the transmission to make it go as slow or as fast as I wanted it to. But anyhow, I think it's probably the only, other than the guy up at Rosa or at Hattin, that the old mechanic worked for him. He made one out of conveyor parts. When the boss was gone, he put some old conveyor parts together and made a snowmobile out of it. And that's sort of what I did. Only he was a little bit ahead of me maybe, but I'd never really. I had seen skidoos that the first ones came out. They had sort of a hull on them, and they had skis underneath, and then a track. I started out to build that, but then I changed it to make it like a hinged one in the middle without any hull on it, just the skis and a hood and stuff, and the engine in the back, of course. So it's like friend used to say where it belongs. And, anyhow, so I've done a lot of mechanical stuff.
I was going to say, Brad Thompson asked me if he could display your
Yeah, I know,
snowmobile
he wants it.
in his shop.
He wants to take it down there and display it. And I don't know.
So who knows?
I haven't said yes yet, but maybe I will.
I have a feeling Kai's taking notes right now on how he can build his own snowmobile.
I don't want a snowmobile, I want a motorcycle.
Or
yeah.
build his own motorcycle. If you have any ideas for that, keep it to yourself.
I've got a motorcycle.
I already have one, I just need to fix it.
Right.
Well, I built a motorbike for my cousins when they were young.
Matthew built one too.
He built Matt
bicycle.
built one. He built one.
Yeah.
Pretty good. It went pretty good too. But this one was just a wash machine engine on the back of a bicycle with a friction wheel that ran on the tire, and you could pedal and get the engine started, and it would go. And if you wanted to stop, you just raise the friction wheel up off the tire, and it would stop. And you could use your regular pedals or brake. It worked pretty good. Kids had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
Can I just interject something that came to my mind? Wayne and his brother did a lot of fun things together, fishing and whatnot, and I'd like him to at some point tell a story about when my dad went fishing with him in the woods. Or is that what you did? You went fishing?
Well,
and my dad was a small New England Yankee, slight of frame and not as tall as Wayne and his brother, who were both 6'3", 6'4", and big, stocky guys. But what was the?
Well, we used to do a lot of fishing and hunting and such, and we were taking my father-in-law into Monk Lake, and there's from the Meridian Road, there's a trail that goes into Monk Lake, and but somehow or other we got off the trail. Wasn't very well defined, and I don't know how, but we got off the trail.
Were you carrying a canoe or something?
I don't think so. I think we were just walking. We had fished from the bottom, but we found a kind of another trail. It seemed like it was pretty good going. And I said to my brother, "I wonder who cut this trail." And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "I didn't know that there was another trail in there." And anyhow, my father-in-law was telling about it, and he said they were wondering who cut this trail in here, made this trail. And he said, "If there was a trail there, I'm Rasputin." He said, "We're just going through the woods." Well, it was sort of a trail, but
Yeah.
he didn't think so. But
He was having trouble keeping up with you, maybe. And
Yeah.
we got there and we got out again.
So that brings me to another subject of when and how did the two of you meet? Because Phyllis, you're an out-of-towner.
I'm an out-of-towner.
Yeah.
I'm a cake eater from Medina, and my family used to come up here and vacation in the trailer park. And my mother was a violinist, and back in the 1920s, she played her violin on the radio, and with a friend, Louis Friedheim, who sang on the radio, and Louis had a cabin on West Bearskin Lake up here, and so my mother wanted to come up and see if Louis was still at his cabin, and he was from World War I. He was a disabled vet. And anyway, Wayne's family had a cabin when Wayne was a little boy, or they were in the state forestry cabin up on the end of West Bearskin Lake, because Wayne's father manned the forest tower that was down at the end of the lake.
Fire tower.
Fire tower. And so anyway, I hate to even say, I must have been 12, 13 years old. And we came up with my twin sister and I, we came up and about 4th of July, it seems to me. And we went to see Louis, and indeed Louis was there. Well, then the same day, Wayne's parents and Wayne and his sister, they came to see Louis, and Wayne's mother brought a picnic lunch or whatever. And
She used to do that regularly.
yeah, she'd do that, for Louis and whatnot. And anyway, so we were in the cabin, and I remember that this family came in the cabin, and here was this pretty handsome guy.
I don't know who that was.
And I was smitten. And somehow it lasted until I became of age.
Mhm.
And he was out of the army, and I was still a young punk. But,
Yeah, because there's a little bit of an age gap between the two of you.
yeah.
Couple of years.
Yeah, but here we are,
Yeah.
57 years after
Yeah, it's
our marriage.
57 years later. And
Mhm. And I've known this guy for over 60
it may
years.
work out, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, still waiting to see.
Yeah.
Still have the attorney on speed dial.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know, did you mention before that you sort of grew up at, or at least you spent a lot of time at Bearskin and other towers too when you were younger?
I don't know, I might have mentioned that last time, I don't know, but, because these things run together.
That's
But-
all right.
but-
You can
but,
mention it again. I
yeah.
don't recall it.
From my earliest years, I was first at West Bearskin. I say I was born there. I was actually, my mother came down to Maple Hill to be closer to the doctor, but then went back up again. So I was, there from my earliest days till maybe I was 6 or 7 years old before we used to only be there in the summertime. We'd come down in the wintertime and go up there in the summertime. And then later years, and prior to that, my dad had been on other towers. He'd been on the Pine Mountain Tower, and there was one on Clearwater. He was there at Cascade Tower and different ones. But then later on, there used to be it wasn't a tower, but it was a station, with a fire station at McFarland, where they had a boathouse and canoes and fire pumps and all that. And he would be there in the summertime. So I'd be up there in the summertime, stay a couple weeks at a time. Then later on, he was at Devilfish Tower on Esther Lake, and my brother and I used to stay there with him for a couple weeks at a time. And so Poland Tower too. So I was kind of familiar with all the towers and the lakes and the state Forest Service maintained. And he was on the Pine Mountain Tower earlier, but that was when there was a wooden tower there. And there's a picture of that tower up at the Chickawauk Lodge museum. Yeah. But
And that cabin they stayed in got struck by lightning
yeah, it was struck by lightning
while they were there.
Yeah. And,
Oh my.
yeah, it split. I think it split 6 or 7. There was a telephone line in there, obviously, because they had to have that for the tower, and it split 6 or 7 poles on the way to the cabin, and then it came in the cabin, took a splinter up out of the floor and stuff. But nobody was hurt or injured, but it was kind of a scary thing. It was before my time, of course. My sister was there. She was older.
That's why she doesn't like lightning.
Yeah, she's still afraid of lightning. Yeah.
I can see why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always say if you get struck by lightning, it's probably your time.
Yeah, not much
If that's
you can
where
do
you
about
go,
that.
it's probably your time. Yeah. But anyhow,
Well, we can wrap it up for the night, I think, and next time we'll pick up from, getting hitched.
Uh-oh.
What? What happened? I think that's where there's a bunch of good stories there.
Undoubtedly. There might be.
Thank you for joining us this evening, everyone. Again, Coffee with Mildred, like, subscribe, so you can be notified. I have some extra interviews coming up that are not going to be on Tuesdays at 7. They will pop up at other times during the week. So that's a good way to get notified about that. Otherwise, have a good evening. Become a member of the Cook County Historical Society at cookcountyhistory.org and click the Join Us button. Have a good evening.